Last time we dealt with Abraham and Isaac, the first two patriarchs. Today we deal with the third, Jacob. We've already seen sibling rivalry stories as a theme in this story. The first thing after the humans get out of Eden is the Cain and Abel story. And then you have Isaac and Ishmael. And now we really get going with Jacob and Esau, the two sons of Jacob. And just to make it extra clear, Jacob and Rachel give birth to them as twins, and there's even a fight over who comes out of the womb first. So you're supposed to get that that's telling you it's not going to be a good outlook for these two twins. So the big questions for ancient Near East are biblically who gets the birthright and who gets the blessing, the father's blessing. Now the birthright in elsewhere you'll see in biblical law is not like a big honor that you're the one who sits at the head table at the family banquets and all that sort of thing. Birthright means you get a double share of your portion of your father's property when he dies. So that means if I have 10 sons and I die, they divide my property into 11 shares, and the firstborn gets 2, and the others each get 1 share. And when you have a lot of sons, like later, Jacob's going to have 12 sons, it doesn't matter quite as much. But you'll have to note, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are all wealthy men. And Isaac's got only 2 sons. So one son's going to get 2/3, and the other one's going to get 1/3. That's what the birthright's about. It's big stakes. And the other is the father's blessing. You'll notice that when Jacob is on his deathbed at the end, and when Isaac is on his deathbed earlier, they give certain blessings to their sons. And the blessings tend to be physical property stuff, that your cows will have a lot of calves and your sheep will have a lot of babies and so on. That also it's monetary. And it's not just a blessing on you means, your skin will glow and God will love you. And it's not that. The blessings are real practical matters. So first there's the struggle. It says while they're still in Rebekah's womb. And Rebekah, it says, goes to God seeking an oracle to explain what is going on in her womb. So you're supposed to understand already they're fighting. And God says there's 2 nations in your womb, meaning each of these children will be born with many descendants that'll become a whole country. And he says one will be stronger than the other. And then there's this famous line that most Bibles translate wrong. The elder will serve the younger. Now that makes sense because it's going to turn out that Esau comes out first and then Jacob. So Esau is the elder, but it's going to turn out that Jacob and Israel are going to be much more powerful in the end than Esau's descendants, which are the Edomites. So, okay, that's fine. Except that's not what it happens. I've told you that the text is generally in prose, but when God gives a prophecy in the Bible is usually in poetry. Now that's really interesting in itself, that history is in prose and prophecy is in poetry. History is locked in time and locked in the arrow of time. It is poetry that can step outside of time, and it's prophets who can give it in poetry. And that's how God normally speaks when doing this. So the problem is prophecy, poetry is less specific than prose. So God's answer to Rebekah is not the way the English translators make it, the elder will serve the younger. It's in the Hebrew this funny mixture of the verbs and the nouns that make it, if I were going to translate it into English, I would make it, the elder the younger will serve. And you go, well, wait, who serves whom? And that's the problem. In the Hebrew, you can't tell. The way Rebekah hears the oracle is anything she wants to hear. She can understand to mean the elder, the younger will serve him. Or she can understand to mean the elder will be serving the younger. And most people have taken it the latter way because they know that's what's going to happen in the story. But it happens that way in the story because Rebecca starts messing around with everything. So she can hear what she wants to hear. So a lot of people say that this proves that this was all a divine plan and that God is making it happen. That's not true. God is putting it in human hands in the story, and then the humans change everything. Now that's important because I said watch the ways in which God becomes manifest through the course of the story and the role that humans play. When God said to Abraham, the covenantal son-in-law is going to be Isaac, remember Abraham says, no, well, let it be Ishmael. And God says, no, I said Isaac, and it's going to be Isaac. So the choice is up to God in that one. But in this one, you're going to see it's Rebecca and Jacob. They manipulate everything, and it's humans who make the decision. So something's changing. Humans are taking more and more of a part in the story, an active part. Then it's this thing that says each parent loves a different son. And though most parents, kids ask this of their parents, who do you love more, me or my sister? And most parents will say, well, I love you equally, which is the last answer on earth that the kid wants to hear. They don't want to hear you love me equally with him. They want to hear, you love me the most, but you can't tell your kid that because then, now kids usually figure it out anyway. And sometimes parents do love all their children equally, and sometimes everybody says, I know families where they say, oh yeah, the daughter is really more tied to the father, and the son is more tied to the mother, and this, and they say that, which is a way of, saying, yeah, parents do sometimes favor one child over the other. They don't mean to. Take, for instance, just to pick a family out of a hat, mine. I had a big sister, and the whole world belonged to her for 3 years, 1 month, and 1 day, and then this kid came along. And in that generation, they favored boys. You probably don't know about this, but in those days, they favored boys. And as it happened, all my first cousins were girls. So there were all these girls and this one boy. How do you think my sister felt about that? Now, she doesn't admit it. She says to this day she loves me, and I believe her, and I love her too. But I was in an unusual position. And when my grandmother died, they went through her purse, and they found in it 1 picture each of all of her girl grandchildren and 7 of me, So sibling rivalry is a reality. You don't need like 50 courses in Freud to get that, So Rebecca loves Jacob more, and Isaac, the father, loves Esau more. Now, it should be up to Isaac because it's a patriarchal society. The guys decide, but as we'll see, that doesn't happen. So you should also understand that when people talk about the role of women in the Bible, they often don't get that it is a very subtle and complex thing. On the one hand, it is a guy's world. It's very clear that the father has more power than the mother, and in all kinds of legal things we'll study when we come to legal sections of the Bible, men have more power and privileges than women. On the other hand, the reality of life is that people find their mechanisms of power within a structure. So even within this male structure, you're going to keep seeing stories like Rebecca and then Rachel and Leah and all the way down to, Samson and Delilah and Bathsheba, where women find their way to have whatever control or self-respect or power or whatever that they can. And sometimes it's through good means, bad means. They get it through their sons who love them, and so that gives them power relative to their husbands. It comes through nagging, it comes through deception, it comes through just power of personality. It's even in male-dominated worlds, there's some families where the woman's the boss. An Israeli guy told me the other day, he said, in my family, I always get the last word. Yes, dear. So it's a good joke. So there's these 2 things that Jacob needs to get. One is the birthright, and the other is the blessing. The way he gets the birthright is this famous story where it says that Esau is a hunter. He's a man of the field, it says. And Jacob, it says, was a simple man living in tents. I don't know what that means. I don't want to know what that means. He's a homeboy. And he's cooking this lentil meal, stew or something. And Esau comes in. He's been hunting and he hasn't gotten anything. And so he's famished, and he says to Jacob, I'm tired, I haven't gotten anything, give me something to eat. And Jacob says what any loving brother would say under the circumstances, sell me your birthright and I'll give you food. And Esau says, well, what good would a birthright do me if I'm dead? So he agrees, he capitulates to what Jacob said. Now, the problem with this story also is that Biblical Hebrew is a much poorer language in vocabulary than English. If you say, well, what's the language on earth that has the most words in it? Do you know which it is? It's English. And English has something like, I'm told, something like 650,000 words. I haven't counted. I'm not going to count. I'm taking the word of the guy who told me that. Whereas Biblical Hebrew has less than 100,000. So often, words for several things require one word, and you have to derive the degree of it from the story. So, for example, the word for to like, to love are the same word. And I can say, I like her. I can say, I love her. And it's probably my tone of voice or the look on my face or the gleam in my eyes that tells you which one of those I mean. And here, too, we don't know if it's that the word for Esau's condition when he comes in from the field, does it mean he was tired, he was famished, he was languishing, he was faint, he was not at his best, a little dizzy. And you can't really tell because they're all one word in Hebrew. So it's hard to tell to what extent he really was forced to capitulate by Jacob. On the face of it, the story is that Jacob's got him and he sells his birthright. And so it is that now Jacob has the birthright. But he did it by this deception or cheating. I mean, in English too, you can pick a nice word or a tougher word for what it is that he does. The other thing is how he gets the blessing. The story is that Isaac is near to death. He's on his deathbed. He's blind. He doesn't know how much longer he has to live. So he calls in Esau and he says, go out and hunt, make me a beautiful meal. I'll eat the meal, and then I'll bless you. And it means a permanent life blessing. He's going to call on God to give Esau all this great stuff. And so Esau goes out to hunt. And while he's out hunting, Rebekah says, Jacob, psst, come here. She says, I'll make your father a meal. And she says she's going to have him, they take a goat, and they kill the goat. And apparently, if you know Near Eastern cooking, if you put enough cumin on things, everything tastes the same anyway. So she's gonna make it taste like the game that Esau's out hunting. And she says, and then you go in and pretend to be your brother Esau. You raising your hand or? Oh, I was hoping. You pretend to be your brother Esau, and you get the blessing meant for your brother. And Jacob says, famous verse from the Bible, behold, my brother Esau is an hairy man, and I am a smooth man. What if my father will touch me? He says, and then instead of a blessing, I'll get a curse. And Rebekah, the quintessential Jewish mother, says, then let the curse be on me. And Jacob says, oh, okay, and then he agrees to do it. I'm sorry, I've already told you one Jewish mother joke. I know so many that I can't do, I feel like Chandler Bing on Friends, just too many jokes, I can't pick one. Yes?
Why couldn't Isaac just bless both of his sons? Like, why would you not want all of your children to have good life and many good?
That's a great question. Why not bless both sons? The thing is, the blessings are specific. He's giving him specific stuff. So in fact, the way it's going to turn out right, Jacob is going to get the blessing, and then Esau says to his father, your question. Esau says, Father, do you have only one blessing? So the father gives him a blessing, but it's an inferior blessing because he already gave all the good stuff to Jacob, My will says that my daughters get 50-50 when I die, but if I had made 175, then I can only give 25% to the other one. I love my daughters equally. 2 daughters. Yeah.
So in the beginning, Esau was going to get the birthright and the blessing.
It seemed that, right, by coming out first, he unquestionably was in line for the birthright. And the father had, by choice, decided to give him the blessing. So Jacob's got to get both away from him. So he's gotten one. He's working on the second one. So he takes this goat meat that the mother prepares, and he puts on his brother Esau's cloak so he'll smell like his brother. And they take the skins of the goat and they put it on his arms so he'll feel hairy like Esau, which means Esau was one hairy dude. I mean, I'm talking a real man here, you know? And I'm not going to say, I'm just trying to get your goat because I need to know I'm kidding, and you would know it, and EWE, you see, it's a pun. And see, if I'd say this in French, I'd say vous, and they'd what's so funny about that? So you may be thinking, what's so funny about the English version? So he goes in. The father says this famous line, the hands are the hands of Esau, but the voice is the voice of Jacob, and you can't tell by that how much the father suspects. So there are a lot of ambiguities here. Now, if you were writing a high school paper and you do this stuff, your high school English teacher would probably circle it in red and write ambiguous on the side, if they cared enough actually to read and grade your papers, which we don't do in high school anymore. And, oh, I'm going to get in trouble for that. And you write ambiguous, and ambiguous is supposed to be something bad. But in literature, there's good ambiguity and bad ambiguity. Call it strong ambiguity and weak ambiguity. In these, where it's leaving questions in your mind that make you interpret more and think more and raise questions about the text, that's good ambiguity. Bad ambiguity is where you read it and you go, what? So that's bad. But the Bible doesn't do much of that second kind. It does these intriguing kinds of ambiguities. So Jacob says to his father, I am Esau, your firstborn, which is half true and half lie. He isn't Esau. He is now Jacob's firstborn. And Jacob gets the blessing from his father Isaac. And then he goes out, and Esau comes in, and Jacob says, who are you? He says, I'm Esau. Give me your blessing, father. And then there's this horrible scene of the two of them wailing when they realize this is done. I mean, Isaac has already given the blessing to Jacob. When you do something biblically in God's name, you'll find out you can't take it back. That's a crucial point. One of the most misunderstood of the 10 Commandments that we're going to get 2 or 3 lectures from now is the one that says, don't take the name of Yahweh your God in vain. People think that means you can't say God damn it, or if you hit your thumb with a hammer, you can't say Jesus Christ. I mean, that's really not true. A colleague of mine says that Jesus Christ is a divinized expletive. You got that? That it started out as Jesus Christ and then became a name. I thought it was very clever, very scholarly of him. You know. And but doing all that sort of thing is not the violation of the commandment. The commandment against taking God's name in vain is, if you swear an oath in the name of Yahweh, you do it, and you do not take it back. And we're going to see a couple of stories in the text where people actually have to do things that involve life and death, but they can't take it back because once you've sworn an oath in the name of Yahweh, that's your oath forever. And apparently this, even though the 10 Commandments aren't given yet, it applies to Isaac too. Jacob's got it. So then Esau's furious. He wants to kill Jacob, and Jacob leaves. Now, the Jacob cycle of stories is very long. You may have noticed it's as much as everything else we've had until now put together. And this whole story of Jacob, then through his sons, especially Joseph, you get almost half of the book of Genesis that way. And there's 50 chapters in Genesis, so it's almost half of that. And I'd break it into 3 cycles. The first is this Jacob and Esau cycle, where the two of them are vying for these things. And there's a lot of deception involved. And then the second is the Jacob and Laban cycle, where Jacob has to run away from his brother Esau, so he goes to Aram. Aram is what is today Syria. And there he meets his mother's brother, his uncle Laban, who turns out to be a bit of a deceiver himself, and much better than Jacob is at it. So it's the deceiver meets the professional deceiver. And he goes up against him, and we see what develops there. And then there's a third cycle of stories in Jacob's life, which is the Jacob and Joseph story. Now, some people have broken those up into separate stories. Some people take the whole Joseph section of the book of Genesis and say it's a separate text written by somebody else, and they call it the Joseph novella. It's a little separate novel about the life of Joseph. They're wrong. And the evidence of that is that all three of these cycles just utterly intertwined among each other. So watch what happens here. In the Jacob story, when he got the birthright away from his brother Esau, even little kids in Sunday school say, that's not right. That's not fair. His brother's hungry, and he does that. Isn't Jacob supposed to be the good one? I mean, what's going on here? And there are all kinds of midrash trying to justify why it is that Jacob did this to Esau. But I'm not interested in the midrash for the moment. I'm interested in the question only, what does the text itself do about it? Not how you and I interpret it, or some ancient midrash writer, how they interpreted it. What is going on in the story itself? And what you find is all these deceptions that are happening in this family in the story all get paid back by the end of the story. So Jacob deceives his father, to get the birthright. Now, in this second cycle, Jacob meets Laban. And you know the story, Laban has two daughters, Leah and Rachel, and Jacob loves Rachel, the younger sister, and they want to get married. And Laban says, well, you know, you have to pay me a bride price for that. And Jacob has run away with nothing, so he doesn't have anything to pay. So Laban says, okay, you'll work for me for 7 years, and at the 7 years you get Rachel. And so, okay, good deal. He works for 7 years for Rachel, and at the end of the 7 years, at the wedding night, he wakes up the next morning, looks next to him in bed, it's Leah. This was not the way the wedding was supposed to go. Now, you might say, if he couldn't tell the difference between the woman he loves the most in the world and another person, maybe he deserves whatever happens to him. But still, you kind of say this was a very bad deal for Jacob, and oh, by the way, a bad deal for Rachel too. And you could argue a pretty bad deal for Leah. So Jacob goes to his uncle, now father-in-law, and he says, why did you deceive me? And Laban's famous answer is one of the great mistranslations ever in the Bible. Laban says, that's not the way it's done in our land, to give the younger before the elder, is what almost all the translations say. That's not what the word says in the Hebrew. It's we don't give the younger before the firstborn. That's not the normal word for the older sister. Birthright doesn't count on girls. Girls need not apply for birthright. It went to men in that world. But the word firstborn kind of has a certain meaning for Jacob, doesn't it? He's just done this number on his brother, and now his uncle says to him, oh no, you know, really, we don't do it that way in our land, to give the younger before the firstborn, firstborn, firstborn. You get it, nephew? Firstborn, you cheater. And you know, I mean, that's in Jacob's head, hearing it that way, not Laban doing that, but I like to make it dramatic. That is to say, Jacob gets paid back in kind for what he did to his brother, and the text, by using that term, even gives you a hint that this isn't just some chance little thing that some professor is going to pull out 2,000 years from now and claim was in the text. There's a hint of it in the text. Now, if you doubt that, let's look at the other one. He got his father's birthright, remember, using the meat and the skins of a goat, and his brother's garment, his brother's cloak. Years later, his sons are going to deceive him. In the third cycle, which is the Jacob and Joseph story, remember, Jacob has a favorite son. He has 12 sons, and his favorite is son number 11, Joseph, because Joseph is the firstborn son of Rachel, the wife he loves most. And so, you know, the brothers are all very jealous of Joseph. The father gives to Joseph this coat of many colors. It's always been translated since King James in English. Now people are trying to make it long-sleeved tunic, striped, pinstripes, polka dots, plaid, McKintock clan. I mean, they do all these things about what this word means. I finally figured out a couple of years ago what it is. It's called a tonet, which means a coat or cloak, some outer garment, pasim. Now remember, Hebrew's written only with vowels. His name is Joseph. Hebrew Yosef. It's Joseph backwards. Now you say, oh, come on. But as a matter of fact, in that same chapter, there are two other puns on the name Joseph. It says, after the father gave him the cloak, his brothers hated him, but then they went on to hate him more. And the word for it, to hate more, is Yosifu. And then there's one more also that occurs. This is all in Genesis 37. That is, the author is playing on that. I don't know whether it means a striped coat or this coat or that coat, but I do know why the author chose that particular cloak. And if you doubt me, bear with me. For about halfway through the course, you're going to find one other person in the Bible wears a pasim coat, and we'll watch what happens to her. So the brothers then, what do? They're out in the field, and Jacob goes out to his brothers, and they take him, and at first they're going to kill him. And remember that Reuben, the eldest brother, says, don't kill him, just we don't want our hand to shed his blood, so throw him in a pit and we'll go away. He'll die there on his own. That's better. And then while he's gone, it says that Judah, one of the 12 brothers, says, what profit is there in that? Let's sell him. And this caravan goes by, and at one point it says it's a caravan of Midianites, who are descendants of Abraham through Keturah. But then later in the text it says it was a caravan of Ishmaelites, who are the descendants of Abraham through Hagar. How should we explain that? Midianites and Ishmaelites are two different groups of people. There's several other contradictions you're going to see in the text where something says this and then something says that. Like someone noticed last time and asked me, there's where God says people will live to be 120 years old. But then several people in the Bible in those early generations lived to be much older. Noah and Methuselah, Russell Crowe and Anthony Hopkins, both live to be over 900 in the text. So there are these contradictions, and I don't want to sidestep them. I want to sidestep them, and I will deal with all of them. Just keep saving them. I'll deal with all of them in lecture 24, not 29. Yeah.
So all the 11 other brothers of Joseph, were they the son of Leah?
The answer to that question is yes and no. Leah gives birth to Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah, the four oldest. Then it says that she gets Issachar and Zebulun, so now she got 6. Rachel gets jealous and finally prays to God, but first she says to her husband Jacob, let's do that thing like that Sarah and Abraham did, and she gives her servant, her maid Bilhah, to him, and Bilhah gives birth to 2 sons who are now legally Rachel's sons, but biologically they're Bilhah's sons. And then Leah said, oh, I can play that game too. I have a maid. So she gives her maid, Zilpah, to her husband Jacob, and she gives birth to 2 more who are biologically Zilpah's sons, but are in fact legally Leah's sons. And Jacob is just sitting back, enjoying this little inter-feminine struggle, which has now gotten him 4 women. And in the end, so they get the 12 sons. And then Rachel herself finally gives birth to Joseph and Benjamin, who are the 2 youngest sons. So the answer is, it's always more complicated than you thought in the Bible. So now the brothers, they take Joseph, And not being completely stupid, they almost immediately realize that when they get home, there aren't going to be 12 anymore. And their father just might notice that. So they take Joseph's coat of many colors, or whatever it is, the pasim coat, and they take it off him, it says, and they kill a goat, and they dip the coat in the blood, and they take it to Jacob and show him, and they say, recognize this. And Jacob says, oh, it's my son's cloak, a wild animal has killed him. What just happened there? They deceived him with their brother's cloak and the parts of a goat, the same thing that he once used to deceive his father to get the blessing. You think that's coincidence? And even worse, he deceives himself. They don't say anything, they say, recognize this. And he says, oh no, it's my brother's clan, my son's thing, and an animal killed him. So every deception is getting paid back. So if you don't get that, watch, there's other deceptions now, right? I mean, Laban deceived Jacob about the two daughters, which wife he gets. So Jacob had to work a second 7 years. It takes him 14 years finally to marry Rachel. It's a very beautiful love story. It would make a good movie. It says the 14 years were like a day in his eyes because he loved her so much. I mean, it's wonderful. That's great. And I see Natalie Portman as Rachel. Who's Leah?
Barbara Streisand.
I think Barbara Streisand, no, I'm not going to say that. But old for the part. I think she'd acknowledge that herself. But I liked her in The Guilt Trip. So you should see that. That's a good Jewish mother joke movie, The Guilt Trip. And who would be Leah? Okay, I'm not sure. I'll get back to you. So,
Nicole Kidman?
who?
Nicole Kidman?
Nicole Kidman. Yeah, that's very interesting. That's very good. I want to be sure that you all have a sense of. Yeah. So you all understand, in case it hasn't been clear yet, film is my life. So, it's okay for us always to digress on film. That's allowed. So when they reach a point where the family is ready to leave now, he's got his 12 sons, and one daughter, Dinah, who will come up later in the story, and he has the 2 wives and the 2 concubines, and they all get up, they're about to leave, but there are some things that have to happen first. First is he's got to pay Laban back for what Laban did to him. So at the end of these working 14 years for Leah and Rachel, he says to Laban, okay, what's going to be my pay now for the work that I do for you? So they make a deal. Jacob says, look, I'll tend all the sheep and goats. And all the ones that come out pure white, those are yours. Any of the ones that come out brown or streaked or patterned or anything like that, those are mine. Now, if any of you have ever seen sheep on the hillside, they're like 90-something% plain white ones. And the interesting colored ones are fewer. So Laban says, oh, good deal. But then Jacob does this strange thing that they would not cover in the biology department of this university. It says he takes these sticks and he cuts patterns in the sticks and he sticks them straight up in the water in front of the pond, the area where the sheep come, where they mate. That's where the sheep, make baby sheep, They get it on. They hook up. I just want to show that, I know the terminology, Sheep turns to another sheep, says, well, I see you again. It's Now what happens apparently is when they mate in front of these sticks, they give birth to lambs and baby goats, kids, that have these patterns and all in them. Now, I don't know what their concept of genetics was at the time. I'm pretty sure it doesn't work like that. But maybe you're supposed to understand that it's magic. If it is that it's magic or miracle, then Jacob is very important because this is the first time a human has done some supernatural thing, right? Until now, anything you saw that was supernatural, fire coming out of the sky and flooding and anything like that, has been the hand of God. But now here's this thing that Jacob does, and you don't know, is it that God is on his side, or does he have power over this or not? Is it magic or is it miracle? It is a classic question in biblical theology and understanding of the difference between magic and miracle. And people argue about that. When we get next week to the story of the Exodus, when Moses and Aaron come in front of the Pharaoh in Egypt, Aaron throws his stick down and, it becomes a snake. But then there are these Egyptian magicians, and they throw their sticks down, and they become snakes too. Now, Aaron's snake wins. He eats their snakes, which must be a truly disgusting thing to watch. But the fact is, the Egyptians were able to do it. It never says they did it by trickery. In Prince of Egypt, they made them going, and they make a trick. But that's Steve Martin and Martin Short. But the real Egyptian magicians, they do it by magic. And that's always been a classic question. People say, what is the difference between what Aaron did and what the Egyptian magicians did? And the usual answer is, when Aaron and Moses do it, it's a miracle. When they do it, it's magic. And you go, but the exact same thing happened. So what's the difference between miracle and magic? And then people say, well, if it's miracle, it derives from God. If it's magic, it doesn't derive from God. And you go, where is your evidence of that in the text? Because it never says that. And if you do think that that's right, then you go, then that means they really believed that magic was real, not trick magic. My father was a stage magician, but I know his tricks, Come to the office sometime, bring a deck of cards, I'll show you some stuff. But these guys, they're doing the real thing. So people argued for a long time over that. And then finally, Shauna Delansky, who was a PhD student under me, and she's now a professor at Carleton in Canada, she wrote a dissertation on magic and miracle in the Bible. And she said the difference between magic and miracle is nothing. Magic and miracle are the same thing. They're doing the same supernatural thing. And you'll see cases where the biblical authors believed magic was real. Like, that's why those Egyptian magicians can do that thing. That's why Jacob can do this thing. They believed magic was real, but then there are laws in the Bible forbidding it. So a Jew is forbidden to perform real magic. That's what my father only did tricks. He didn't really make elephants disappear and things like that. And so I hate to break this to you. The fact is, a Jew can't go to Hogwarts. It's biblically forbidden to do magic. And the irony, of course, is that Daniel Radcliffe is half Jewish, so I would have done it for the part myself, I admit. So I think Shauna's paper which she then published as a book, if you want to find it, it's called "Now You See It, Now You Don't: Magic and Miracle in the Bible," and it's just. They can do things. So it's unclear by what power Jacob does this. And either the person who wrote the story believed this would really work, or the person understood that isn't how life works, but that Jacob is doing something extraordinary. But the result is more and more the sheep and goats come to look like the kind Jacob is supposed to get, and he basically gets the vast majority of the herd away from Laban. Now, I told you that there's always a hint in the text that these things didn't just happen by chance. So it says at the end, Jacob thus got away from Laban. He got all of his rams and his ewes. His ewes and his ram, a ewe, E-W-E. The word for a ewe in Hebrew is a rachel. And the word for a ram is an aisle, which maybe you can't see it, but it's a twist of the name Leah. So he got all of his Rachels and Leahs away from him. Now, yeah, it's coincidence, right? Well, now we're not done, because Rachel got a bad deal on that too, because of the deception that her father did. So she pays her father back too. It says when the family is all leaving, she takes her father's teraphim. Teraphim are understood to be household idols, statues of some size, maybe this size, maybe full human size, but some kind of statues that, religious icons that belong to her father. And she steals them. So then when Laban comes home and he finds that the whole family is gone, And not only are his daughters and his grandchildren and all gone, and he's lost a lot of his sheep and all, but he also notes that his teraphim are gone. So he gets a big army of his guys, all of his supporters, and they go after Jacob and his family. And when they catch up, he says to Jacob, you've taken my daughters and grandchildren, you've stolen them away in the night, and now on top of that, you've stolen my gods. And notice again, the story is presenting it as if the pagan believes that the statue is the god, which I've told you was not true. And Jacob says, he loses it. He says, I've been putting up with this for you for 20 years. You've been cheating me day and night, and now you're accusing me of stealing from you. I didn't steal anything from you. You can search everybody and let whoever stole something from you die. Thus, unwittingly putting a curse on his wife, Rachel. And then they search everybody's tent, and as always happens in these stories, they come to Rachel's tent last. And she hides the teraphim inside her camel saddle on the ground of her tent. And she sits on the camel saddle. And when her father comes in to search her tent, she says, forgive me, my father, that I don't stand in your presence. I have the way of women, which presumably means she's menstruating. And if there is any subject on earth that will make men go away, it's that. And he says, oh yeah, no teraphim here. And he goes out to them. So they never find him. But she doesn't know that. She's the one who took it. And her husband said, whoever stole your things, let that person die. And if you look a few chapters later, the next story in which Rachel figures is she gives birth to Benjamin, the 12th son, and she dies in childbirth. And again, it's related to what she had done. Because if she said, I have the way of women with me, there's two possibilities. Way of women can mean menstruating, or it might possibly mean she's saying I'm pregnant. But either way, if it's that she was menstruating, then she's definitely lying, because she couldn't be menstruating, she was pregnant. And if it's that she's pregnant, the same point comes in, because she hid this from her father, she pays the penalty. And you go, wait a minute, this isn't fair, because this one, the punishment is so out of proportion with the crime. But the curse is on her, and it happens, and so she dies. And again, there's the hint in the text that it's connected to what she had done. So on the one hand, when you read these stories, it seems like there's this story about Jacob, and he's, oh yeah, then there's the story, then it happens with Laban, and sometimes you ever see a really well-done movie where the whole movie seems to be a whole bunch of separate stuff, and then in the last scene, it all comes together, and everything makes sense. And that's what's going on here. And it took us a couple thousand years to notice this, that all of these things were connected and that it's one beautifully structured story. Now, then there's the matter of Jacob's sons. Are you raising it? They have sold their brother. They nearly killed him, then they sold him into slavery. So what's going to happen to them? So then you know the story is Joseph goes to Egypt, and he gets involved in a little deception there himself. He is a slave to this Egyptian officer of the Pharaoh named Potiphar. And as the story, as we read it, is that Potiphar's wife accuses him of attempted rape, when actually it was that she wanted to seduce him, and he declined her. And, you know, hell hath not the fury of a woman spurned. And so she goes to her husband and says, this Hebrew that you brought with us, which sounds strangely like Adam saying to God, the woman which you put with me. Remember, when you're trying to get out of something, try to pin it on the other person who's accusing you if you can do it. And she says, this Hebrew who you brought with us, he, etc. And it's interesting, it's a famous passage. There's an old game that's played in the Bible, and you're going to play it on your midterm exam, so I'm telling you now, called Who Says to Whom? And you get a quotation from the Bible, and you have to say who says it to whom. And if you really get technical, then you have to say, and in what book of the Bible and in what situation. So this one is interesting because it's a famous one, because Potiphar's wife first goes to all the other servants in the house, and she says, this Hebrew that he brought among us has, and it's a way that means like fooled around with me, toyed with me. And then when she goes to, he says this Hebrew, the wording is, this Hebrew he brought to fool around with us It says that. When she goes to her husband, she says, this Hebrew whom you brought, she says, to fool around with me. So to the servant, she says to toy with us because she wants to get them all on her side. To her husband, she says to toy with me because she wants to get him, you know. So you see how very little things in wording can be very effective, but also that's a famous who says to whom, because you have to know which one she says to the servants in the house and which one she says to her husband. That was an entrance question I had in seminary to see if we would know that. You know, you can't be a rabbi unless you know the answer to know. So, I quit the seminary, right? I covered that already, didn't I? Yeah. I'm a dropout. I'm not a seminary graduate. I can't perform. If I do a wedding, you're not married. If I do a funeral, you're not dead. I mean, I'm not qualified. So, so now Jacob has suffered because of a deception. I mean, Joseph has suffered because of a deception as well. He's imprisoned for a long time, but then there's this strange story, you know, about the butcher, the baker, the candlestick maker, the Indian chief, these guys in the prison, the baker and the wine steward. He's the sommelier. So we should use the correct term here. The baker and the sommelier end up in prison with Joseph, and he interprets their dreams correctly. And then later, when the sommelier is returned to his position with the Pharaoh, there's this story where the Pharaoh has these dreams. And he says, well, there were these 7 fat cows, and then 7 thin cows came up and ate them up. And nobody can interpret the dream. And then the sommelier says, you know, when I was in prison, I met this guy who was really good at interpreting dreams. So they bring him in front of the Pharaoh, and the Pharaoh says, I've heard that you can interpret dreams. And Joseph says, not me, God. And you'll notice this keeps happening in the text. When humans are able to perform great powerful things, like Joseph and Moses and Aaron, people keep saying, you did it, and the person keeps saying, not me, God. But they have to keep saying it because it's natural psychologically that humans relate to the one they see, not to this invisible power behind. So the Pharaoh says to him, I heard you can interpret dreams. He says, not me, God. And then, you know, he successfully interprets the dream. And Pharaoh says, now I see that you're the wisest because you were the only one who could interpret my dreams. So the Pharaoh does not get the message at all. Everybody still focuses on the person. Remember that. It'll matter big time for the rest of the Bible. So Joseph successfully interprets the dream that there's going to be 7 years of good, you know, of plenty, and then 7 years of famine, which you got to admit is pretty good. I mean, the greatest Freudian analyst in the world would not guess that a dream of 7 skinny cows eating 7 fat cows means that for the next 14 years the following things are going to happen. So that's pretty good. He should have been given, you know, a PhD in psych as well as everything else that he gets. But he doesn't. He's made like number 2 to Pharaoh. You know, he's Jafar now in Egypt. And you know what happens. His brothers come during the years of famine to buy food because there's no famine all over, even as far as Canaan where they're living. And they come in front of him and they don't recognize him. He was 17 when they sold him into slavery. Now it's many years later. He's a man. He looks different and he looks Egyptian. And so they don't get it, who he is. And they're buying food. And Joseph accuses them of being spies. And they say, no. We're 12 sons of one man, but one son isn't, they say. He is no more. Because remember, they don't know if Joseph is alive or dead. So they say, so one isn't, they say. And the youngest, which is Benjamin, he's still back with our father in Canaan. We're just brothers, we're not spies. And he says, well, I'm going to test you to see if that's true. And he takes one of them, Simeon, and he puts Simeon in prison. He says, I'm holding him as a hostage. You guys go back and you bring me this younger brother and show him to me, and then I'll believe you. So then they go back to the father, and the father says, oh, no, you're not going back. I lost Joseph. I lose Benjamin, too. Then I got no sons left from Rachel. You can forget it. But then finally they get really hungry again, and Joseph and Judah, the brother who had said, let's sell Joseph, now says, I'll stand up for Joseph. I guarantee his safe return. And so they go back and they take Benjamin with them. And they're taken in front of Joseph, and he sees Benjamin, and he says, everybody leave me. And he goes out behind a curtain, and in the next room, and he cries, and then he comes out and he reveals himself to his brothers. It's this beautiful scene of reconciliation with the brothers. Now here's my point. There's this funny thing he does with the brothers. He says to his number two, put their silver back in their bags that they paid for the food. So they go back and they're on the road and they open up their bags and there's all their portions of silver are still there in the bag. When they come back the second time, Joseph first sends them off. He hasn't revealed himself yet, and he does the same trick. They put their silver back in their bags and this cup that belongs to him, which he has them put in Benjamin's bag. And then he has his men chase after them. They say, "You've stolen something." And they open up all the bags, and their silver is there, and Joseph's cup and Benjamin's bags. They say, "Okay, we're going to kill him." And then they're taken back in front of Joseph, and they're begging. And Judah goes up to him, the one who had said, "Let's sell him" originally, and said, "Please, we're wrong. Take me, not him. Don't. It'll kill our father if you kill Benjamin." And that's when Joseph is so moved to reveal himself to him. Now here's my question. How many portions of silver were returned to the brothers on the first trip? Mathematics. I learned this rule about the Bible and life. If you count anything, you will learn something interesting. How many portions of silver were returned on the first trip? Nope. It's not 10.
Was it 7, was it?
No. Remember, Joseph is there. Benjamin is back in Canaan. Simeon he takes and makes a hostage and puts in jail. So how many brothers went back? 9 portions of silver are returned on the first trip. On the second trip, how many portions of silver are returned?
You mentioned
10 or 11?
10.
11. Right? Because now it's the 9 brothers plus Benjamin is with them, and he lets Simeon out of prison, and they all go back. So it's 9 the first time, 11 the second time. What is the total number of portions of silver that is returned to the brothers? 20. What was the price that they were paid when they sold Joseph into slavery? 20 portions of silver. Now, I admit that's a subtle one. I don't think the brothers would have gotten it. And almost no one who's ever read the story noticed it. But it's, once again, it's a payback for what's happened. And if you still have doubt in it, remember, when the brothers come before Joseph later, they bring their father down with them, and they all settle in Egypt for a while. And when the father dies, the brothers start to worry, like maybe now Joseph is going to kill them, because they had all seen Godfather 2, where the godfather, Michael, won't kill his brother Fredo as long as their mother is alive. But right after the mother dies, you know it's goodbye Fredo. Ciao, addio, Fredo. You know, he's out. And you didn't know I spoke fluent Italian, did you? Fettuccine. So now that the father has died, they're all really afraid, and they come in front of Joseph and they say, "We are your slaves." Now, they had once sold him into slavery, and now they're saying, "We are your slaves." Now, the point of this is there's this incredible run of deceptions and paybacks, and everybody who does something gets paid back by somebody, but then the somebody who did it deceived, so now that person's got to get paid back, and it goes on and on and on. And you know, this really happens in families, that somebody hurts somebody, and then they have to hurt them back, and so then their kid has to be mad at Aunt Harriet for doing that, and these things can run for generations in families. And the question is, I mean, all of you have probably seen it in your own family sometimes where there's an anger that spills on from one person to the next in the family. I'm not accusing you. I'm talking just psychological reality here. And you have to say, how can such a situation end once it starts? And the way this ends finally is when Joseph forgives his brothers. He forgoes the recompense that he's entitled to. I mean, yeah, he scared them, accusing them of spies and all, but he didn't hurt them. They offered themselves as slaves to him, and he didn't take it. And the words, if you look in the end of Genesis, are beautiful. He says, "You meant this for bad. God meant it for good, to keep many people alive." He says, "Am I in the place of God?" And it says, "And he spoke on their hearts." That's when it ends, when somebody who's manifestly entitled to be paid back gives it up and forgives instead. I think that's incredible. And if you look at that scene in the book, it's just a beautiful, beautiful scene. Now, there's a few more deceptions, so I may as well cover them. I used to like, there was this guy who used to be on TV, his name was Milt Kamen. He wasn't exactly a comedian, people called him a humorist. And he would retell plots of movies and plays and all. And once he'd be, like on The Tonight Show, he would do that. And he retold the story on one of them, I always remember it, of Hamlet. And he's gone through the whole story now, where I hope you all know Hamlet. By the end, it's only the greatest play ever written, except maybe Oedipus. And at the end of the play, everybody's dead all over the stage. There's Hamlet. He's been run through by Laertes' sword, which had poison on it. And there's Laertes, because they switched sword, and Laertes got the poison sword through him too. And then there's Hamlet's mother, Gertrude. She drank this cup toasting her son. It was poison, and she's dead. And then his uncle, poison, Andy ran him through. He's dead. And Ophelia's over there. She drowned, and she's dead. And over there is her father Polonius, who was behind a curtain where Hamlet thought it was somebody else, and he ran him through. So he's dead behind the curtain over there. So they're all dead all over the place on the stage. And Kamen had this idea. She had add one last thing to the end of the story. The ghost of Hamlet's father, who you haven't seen since the beginning, comes back out, and he walks across the whole stage, and he looks at all that, and he looks at the audience, and he says, "You see, go try and raise a family." That's the Jacob story. And stories of intergenerational struggles between families, starting with Oedipus. I mean, it's one of the most common themes in all of literature. In the Greek myth, especially the story of Aeschylus and Agamemnon and everything that happens starting a generation before him and then through generations after him is one of these things where these keep building in the family. And this is the Bible's version of it. Now there's a couple other bits to it. One is the story of Dinah. There it says that Jacob and his family are settled outside the city of Shechem, which you should remember, because this city will matter a lot later. And the prince of the city of Shechem, a guy named Shechem, has sex with Dinah. And many Bibles actually write on the top of the page the rape of Dinah. And people lecture about this as a rape. And if you look in the text, it never uses the Hebrew term for rape. It is not at all clear. All we know is that they had sex. You don't know if it's a rape, a seduction, they liked each other. You can't tell. What you can tell is her brothers don't like it. Not with my sister, you don't. So they're very angry. But Shechem and his father, whose name is Hamor, which is strange because it's Hebrew for ass, but the ass was an okay animal in the ancient Near East, so you could name your son Ass, and like the kids in junior high didn't make fun of him for that. Middle school, we don't have junior high anymore. And I'm showing my age. So Shechem and Hamor go to the family and say, look, we'll give our daughters to you, you give your daughters to us, we'll all marry each other and be happy and live as one big happy community. But Jacob's sons are not happy about what happened to their sister, and they didn't like the order of events, like the sex first and the proposal after, when it was supposed to be the other way around. And so they say to these guys, well, here's the problem. We're circumcised, and you're all not. And so that would be like disgusting to us. And it is true, by the way, that in history, communities that do circumcision have sometimes looked down on those who don't, as like doing something wrong. Like the Egyptians, practiced circumcision. And there's an Egyptian text where Egyptians refer to Greeks as those uncircumcised dogs, which means probably pretty negative. So they say, if you guys all circumcise yourselves, then we'll agree to this, otherwise go away. Well, he really loves Dinah and he really wants her, so he goes back and he persuades all the men of the city of Shechem to get circumcised. Now, I in my life have twice witnessed adult male circumcisions. It didn't look comfortable to me. And so these guys are sitting there, it's a couple days later, and they're sitting there going, oh, and And that's when two of her brothers, Simeon and Levi, come in and they massacre the whole town, all the men. And Jacob says to them, to Simeon and Levi, "What have you done? You've made me stink in the nostrils of all the Canaanites now. This is terrible." And they say to their father, "Should he treat our sister like a whore?" And that's the end of the story. It's Genesis 34, the last sentence is, "Should treat our sister like a whore?" And you never find out, well, what was his answer to that question? But you do find out later. When Jacob is on his deathbed, he's giving the blessing to all of his sons. So you should look at it. It's in poetry, and now it's reliving what his father Isaac did. He's on his deathbed, and he gives a blessing to all 12 sons. And in it, the oldest is Reuben. And he says, "Reuben, you are the firstborn, preeminent in strength and in might, but unstable as water, you will not be preeminent." And he takes the birthright away from Reuben. And you go, why? What did Reuben do? If you go back, it's in Genesis 35, there's like a one-sentence story that Reuben once had sex with Bilhah, Jacob's concubine. One thing you really don't do in polygamous cultures, ancient or modern, is sleep with your father's wives. So on his deathbed, he says, "You will not be preeminent because you went up to your father's couch." And that's presumably an allusion to that. So it's another deception and another payback. Simeon and Levi had massacred the people of Shechem. Now they're second and third, so they're the next ones in line to get the birthright once Reuben's eliminated. And if you look in Genesis 49, Jacob says on his deathbed, "Simeon and Levi are brothers. Implements of violence are the tools of their trade. I will scatter them in Israel. I will divide them in Jacob." And so they're eliminated from order in the birthright. And in fact, if you look in Who Wrote the Bible, there's a map of Israel that shows where all the tribes were. If you look on that map, you will not see any Levi or Simeon territory anywhere on the map. They got eliminated and dispersed among the rest of the Israelites. So they're out. And then it's the fourth son, Judah, the one who kind of turned good at the end. He's the one who gets the birthright. And then Joseph gets some really good stuff too. So again, everything is being paid back. Indeed, let's stop on one of those brothers again, Simeon. Why is it that Joseph picks Simeon as the one to put in prison as the hostage? Remember when he was sold into slavery, the oldest brother, the one in charge, would have been Reuben, and Reuben said, "Let's not kill him, we'll put him in a pit." And then Reuben goes away and is not present when his brothers sell Joseph into slavery. So he's not culpable. The oldest son, the one who's culpable, is Simeon. So he's the one who gets chosen as the hostage. Again, nobody gets away with anything in this story. And then in Genesis 38, there's the story of Judah and Tamar. This is a good story. Judah has these three sons, Er, Onan, and Shelah. And Er gets married to this Canaanite woman, Tamar. And he does something, it says, that angers the Lord, and he gets struck dead. Now, don't take this as a common thing in the Bible. I know people say, "If I'm lying, may God strike me dead right now." And there was a great routine by George Carlin, of blessed memory, where Carlin, who was very anti-religion, atheist and all, and he said, "There is no God, and if I'm wrong, may God strike all of you dead right now." And that doesn't happen a lot in the Bible, but it happens apparently to this eldest brother for a reason we don't know what it is he did, but he dies, childless. Now there's the problem that he will die and there'll be no one to carry on his name. Now that becomes a big thing in the Bible about carrying on a father's name. And so there is this particular kind of marriage where if you die childless and you have a brother, the brother marries your wife, and the first child is named son of you, not the son of his biological father. You get that? A brother-in-law in Latin is a lever, so it's called levirate marriage. where now Tamar has to be married to her brother-in-law, her dead husband's brother, Onan. And it says, this is apparently the story of the first case of levirate marriage. Later, it becomes a law. But in this case, I guess this wasn't commonly done because Judah tells his son Onan to go in and have sex with Tamar. And so he didn't like the idea of it, it says. And so it says he withdrew at the last minute and spilled his seed at the ground. So that's premature withdrawal, and he spills his semen on the ground instead of into her. God doesn't like this, it strikes him dead too. Some people derive from this that biblically, therefore, it's wrong to masturbate, it's wrong to withdraw. No, this is just one story about one guy who did this one thing. Don't worry. You're all okay. You all did that, and it's all okay. You can tell him your professor said so. And am I getting a little too close for comfort here? Or would you just, So now Tamar comes to her father-in-law Judah, and she says, okay, you got one more son, Shelah, let me have him. Well, Judah stops and thinks about this. All he knows is everybody who marries this girl drops dead. He's had 2 sons, they're gone, and now she wants the 3rd one. So Judah says, yeah, Shelah, right, Shelah. Gee, he's too young. You wait till he gets older, and then I'll send for you. And then you can marry him too. So she goes back and she lives in her father's house, and Shelah grows up and she doesn't get any wedding invitations. And she knows that she's been deceived now by Judah as well. Meanwhile, it says Judah's own wife dies. So he's kind of lonely, and he's out with the sheep. And she takes off her widow clothes and dresses up to look like a prostitute and stands by the side of the road. And he says, oh, let me come to thee, And Julia Roberts says to Richard Gere, well, oh no, that was a different version. She says to him, what'll you pay me? He says, I'll send you a goat kid. Remember, wherever there is a goat in this story, there is deception. Without exception, for the first 10 books of the Bible, if there's a goat, somebody's going to get deceived. And we use the expression in English to pull the wool over someone's eyes, to get their goat, stuff like that. It's a thing. Goat is a symbol of deception. So he says, I'll send you a goat. And she says, yeah, you'll send it. I've heard that one before. So he has to give her some signs as a pledge. So he gives her his cord. We think that one of those words means, which would be evidence that he had opened up his robe, right? He gives her his cord. He gives her her staff, which is, in case you didn't notice that, a phallic symbol, just as much as those sticks that Jacob put in the water in front of the sheep and the goat. I mean, you get a lot of phallic symbols. You got a snake at the beginning. What do you want? So there are a lot of phallic symbols here. And he gives her that, and he gives his signet. And we know this in the history that people had 2 ways of signing documents. You took wet clay, and you put it on the outside of a document, and you either had a ring that had your name in it, and you'd stamp it, or you had, it's called a cylinder seal, where it's like this with your name in it, and you'd stamp it. So he gives her his signet, which is either the ring or the cylinder. And he has sex with her, and he leaves, and then he sends the goat, and she's not there to receive it. She disappeared because she isn't, in fact, a prostitute, and it wasn't about the payment. But she gets pregnant because apparently in the story we've seen in the Bible thus far, every time anybody ever has any sex at all, they get pregnant every time. I know couples who try for years, but no, these got first shot every time they get pregnant. And so she's brought in front of him. Now, she is accused of adultery because in her position, on the one hand, she is bound now to the youngest son, Shelah. So technically she's a wife, and if she has sex with another man, that's adultery. On the other hand, they don't know who did it or anything. So, but she's accused, and they're going to burn her. And she says to Judah, okay, yeah, I had sex with a man, and here's the evidence of who the man was. And she puts down the signet and the cord and the staff. And he says, she is more right than I. And he admits that he done wrong, and she's not killed or anything, and she in fact gives birth to twins, which should come as a surprise to nobody, but and she has twins. And again, there's a question of which son comes out first and who's the firstborn and the secondborn. And you're going to want to remember that because one of those two twins, Perez, is about 20 generations later in the story going to be the ancestor of King David and thus of the Messiah. So this story here in Genesis is not just a little sex story in a family. This is a crucial development. Also notice the thing about the preserving the father's name in levirate marriage. The way that works is, in Hebrew you're known as so-and-so ben so-and-so. Ben in Hebrew means, son of. And it's like in Greek it's Ides. When you hear somebody's name is something Ides at the end, that means son of that name. In Russian or Polish, it's Vich. So if your name is Ivanovich, it means your father's name was Ivan and you're Ivanovich. In Arabic, it's Ibn. In Hebrew, it's Ben. So if you're, so-and-so, Ben, so-and-so, that's you, that's your father. So the idea is that your name shouldn't die out. And since Er died and then Onan died, the name will die out. So when the third son, Shelah, has the sex with her, and now it turns out it's going to be Judah who gets sex with her, so they name that son Perez. If you say, what's Perez's last name? I assume it's son of Er, the first one who died. The next son should be named son of Onan. And that way, a name doesn't die out. A lot of people are confused about this because they think the son should have been named Er or Onan if that's the name you're trying to preserve. But no, it's son of Er or son of Onan. It's a technical little point, but so many people get it wrong that it's worth noting. So you've got this massive deceptions. They all come together. It ends with forgiveness. It's this extraordinary finish to a story that we saw begin with creation. And we've come all this distance. And I told you about how it's a book that's rich in background. So you find out now that what happened in those first 7 days of creation had implications for then what would happen like 10 generations later with a flood, which had implications for 10 generations with the choice of Abraham, which has implications for Isaac, which has tremendous implications for Jacob and Esau. And now we're down to the next generation, Joseph, and even Judah and his twin sons. So we're down to the next generation. And so they're growing and growing. And what started as the story of the whole universe has narrowed to becoming the story of this one family and the focus on the one man. And then when we start next time with the book of Exodus, you see it's going to go out again. It's going to be the story of an entire people and their implications relative to all the other people of the earth. So you have to get a feeling like, here you want a movie comparison. In the movie Psycho, which most of you were afraid to see, by Hitchcock, it takes place in Phoenix. And in the opening scene of Psycho, it's this broad camera shot of Phoenix where you're looking at the whole city. And then it starts to narrow in, and it comes in on this one building. It's a hotel. And then it goes to the window of the hotel, and then in through the window, and you see this beautiful woman, Janet Leigh, in lingerie on a bed inside the hotel. So it's the wide shot narrowing to the individual, and then the story will spread out again among her family, her sister, detective, and everybody else who gets, and a certain other family, and his mom, that will get involved. I'm not saying anything else, that get involved in the story. And that's what the Bible does. It starts with the wide shot. It's about the whole universe, and then it narrows to a naked woman, and naked man. And let's be fair. And then it opens up and becomes about all of humankind, and then it narrows again to being about one man, and then that widens out to being his whole family. And by the beginning of Exodus, the family will have been around long enough that they will have turned into an entire nation. That flow of generations is amazing. And again, this was the first work on earth that did that. There is no story on earth, fiction or nonfiction, there's no story like this that does this story of a development through generations of how something happened. So it's remarkable. See you next week.